They told you Lionel Messi was the greatest footballer of all time, the most complete, the most gifted, the most decorated, but that description is actually too small because being the best implies a comparison. It implies a scale. It implies that Messi exists within the same system as everyone else. And that's the first mistake, because Messi didn't just win inside football, he quietly rewrote the rules of it. And the most dangerous part is, almost no one noticed it happening in real time. Defenders didn't just fail to stop him, systems collapsed around him. Tactics that worked for decades suddenly looked obsolete. And what made it even more unsettling was how normal he made it look. No theatrics, no noise, just a quiet dismantling of everything we thought we understood about the game. So the real question isn't whether Messi was the best, it's something far more uncomfortable. What if Messi wasn't playing the same game as everyone else in the first place? This is not a story about Lionel Messi being the greatest footballer of all time. It is a story about how one player systematically broke the logic of football itself, because for over a century the game operated on structure, space, physicality, and predictable patterns. And then Messi arrived and turned all of those certainties into weaknesses. And the deeper you look, the clearer it becomes that his dominance was never just about talent, it was about forcing the entire sport to adapt to him rather than the other way around. And that leads us to a far more interesting question. Not how Messi became great, but why football, a system designed to limit individuals, completely failed to contain him, and what that failure reveals about the game we thought we understood. To understand why Messi should not have worked, you have to understand what football actually rewards, because at its core the sport has always favoured the obvious advantages. Speed beats distance, strength wins duels, height dominates aerial battles, and physical presence dictates control. This is the foundation of modern football, a system built to reward athletes who can impose themselves on the game, and for decades every generation moved further in that direction. Players became faster, stronger, more explosive, more optimized, and naturally the expectation became clear. If you do not meet these physical standards, you do not survive at the highest level. And this is exactly where Messi begins to look like an error in the system. Because from the very beginning, he lacked almost everything the game values. He was small, noticeably smaller than everyone else. He lacked physical strength. He could not overpower defenders. He did not have elite sprint speed in the traditional sense. And even as a child, he was already behind physically due to a growth hormone deficiency, a condition that not only limited his development, but also made his future uncertain. Clubs did not just see talent, they saw risk, they saw a body that might never catch up, and in a system that filters out weakness early, this should have been the end. This is where the story should have ended, because football does not wait for players who do not fit the model. It replaces them, it forgets them, it moves on. But Messi did not disappear. Instead, he entered a system that unknowingly amplified what made him different, and that is where the logic of football begins to crack. At the highest level, football becomes less forgiving, not more. The margins shrink, the speed increases, the pressure intensifies, and every weakness is exposed faster than ever. And this is where players like Messi are supposed to break, because when space disappears and defenders close in, physical limitations are amplified, not hidden. This is the environment where stronger, faster players thrive and where smaller, weaker players are usually erased. And yet Messi did not just survive in this environment, he began to dominate it. And that contradiction created a deeper problem, because the more the game evolved to stop players like him, the more unstoppable he seemed to become. Defenders were not just failing. They were reacting too late, not by seconds, but by fractions of a second that decided everything. They stepped in and found nothing. They committed to tackles that were already irrelevant. They closed angles that had already changed. And what made it more frustrating was that nothing about Messi looked overwhelming in isolation. He was not outrunning entire defenses over long distances. He was not physically overpowering anyone. He was not using traditional advantages. And yet every attempt to contain him felt incomplete, as if defenders were always solving the wrong problem. And this is where the tension truly builds. Because if Messi was not winning through speed, not winning through strength, and not winning through physical dominance, then what exactly was he doing? What was the mechanism behind this control? Why did the game seem to slow down around him while everyone else rushed? Why did entire defensive systems collapse not from chaos but from precision? This is where the surface explanation fails, because what we are watching is not just skill, it is something deeper, something structural, something that forces us to question whether Messi is playing football the way it was designed, or if he has quietly moved beyond it. To understand Messi, you have to stop looking at what he does and start asking why it works, because everything about him only becomes clear when you shift from observation to explanation, and the first layer of that explanation is psychological. Most players react to the game, they process what is happening and then decide, but Messi operates differently. His decisions do not feel reactive, they feel preloaded, as if the choice has already been made before the situation fully forms, and that creates a delay in everyone else, not because they are slow, but because they are thinking in real time while he is acting ahead of it. And this is why defenders look frozen, not physically frozen, but cognitively late. They are always one step behind a decision they have not even recognized yet. And this leads to the second layer, which is tactical, because football at its highest level is a game of structure, positioning, spacing, and collective movement. Teams are designed to control space, to limit options, to force predictable outcomes, but Messi disrupts that entire structure not by breaking it directly, but by existing in the spaces it cannot account for. He does not just move into space, he appears in the gap before it fully opens. He positions himself between lines in ways that distort defensive shape, forcing players to choose between stepping out or holding position, and either choice creates imbalance. And once that imbalance appears, even for a moment, Messi exploits it instantly. Not with power, but with precision. And this is why systems fail against him, because systems rely on predictability, and Messi introduces uncertainty at the exact moment the system needs stability. And then there is the third layer, which is physical, but not in the way most people think, because Messi's body is not built for dominance, it is built for efficiency. His low center of gravity allows him to change direction faster than taller players can adjust. His balance allows him to absorb contact without losing control. His touch is optimized for minimal movement, meaning he does not waste time or energy. Every action is reduced to its most effective form, and this creates an illusion. It looks like he is moving slowly, but in reality, he is removing unnecessary motion, which makes him faster in the only way that matters: decision speed combined with execution. And when you combine these three layers, psychological anticipation, tactical disruption, and physical efficiency, you begin to see the real pattern. Messi is not reacting to football, he is predicting it. He is not playing within the system, he is operating just outside of it. And this is where the deeper truth emerges, because football is built on the assumption that players will behave in certain ways, that they will follow patterns, that they will make decisions within expected boundaries, and Messi violates that assumption continuously. He does not choose the obvious option, he chooses the correct one, even when it looks wrong, and that forces defenders into impossible situations, because they are trained to respond to patterns that no longer apply. And this is why he feels inevitable, not because he is unstoppable in a physical sense, but because by the time you understand what he is doing, it has already happened. And this is the moment where the idea of Messi being the best starts to collapse, because being the best suggests comparison, it suggests ranking, it suggests that he is simply more skilled than others. But what if that is not the case? What if Messi is not just better, but fundamentally different? Not a higher level within the system, but a disruption of the system itself. And if that is true, then the question changes again, because now we are not asking how good Messi is, we are asking what happens when a player no longer fits inside the rules of the game. Once Messi's difference became undeniable, the game did not immediately understand it, but it started to react to it. And that reaction is what turned him from an anomaly into a force that reshaped football, because early in his career he was still seen as a brilliant dribbler, a technical winger, a player who could break defenses with individual moments. But as the seasons passed, something shifted. His influence expanded beyond moments and into structure. He was no longer just beating players, he was controlling entire matches, dictating tempo, manipulating space, and forcing teams to reorganize around his presence. And this is where the rise truly begins, because under Pep Guardiola, Messi was not just improved, he was redefined. The false nine role removed him from traditional positions and placed him at the center of everything. Defenders could not mark him in the usual way. If they followed him, they left space behind. If they held position, they gave him time, and every decision created a new problem. And this was not accidental. It was the system adapting to amplify what made Messi different. And the results were not just impressive, they were historic. 91 goals in a calendar year, multiple Ballon d'Or titles, Champions League dominance. But the numbers only tell part of the story, because the real change was how opponents approached the game. Entire defensive systems were built with one objective: limit Messi. And even then it rarely worked. Teams double-marked him, triple-marked him, collapsed their shape around him. And still he found solutions, not through force, but through understanding. And this is what elevated him beyond performance into inevitability. Because when a player forces the entire sport to adjust to him, when tactics, formations, and strategies evolve because of his presence, he is no longer just succeeding inside the system, he is shaping it. And that is when the idea of Messi as simply the best begins to feel incomplete. Because what we are witnessing is not just dominance, it is transformation. And at this point, the story should feel complete. A small player defies the system, rewrites expectations, dominates the sport, and proves that talent can overcome any limitation. But football never lets a perfect story exist for long, because the very thing that made Messi unstoppable also began to create a new problem. The more the game adapted to him, the more it started to isolate him. Teams stopped trying to stop Barcelona as a whole. They focused on disconnecting Messi from everything around him, cutting passing lanes, compressing space, forcing him deeper, forcing him wider, forcing him into positions where his influence could be reduced. And slowly, almost invisibly, the dynamic changed. Messi was still brilliant, still dominant, but now the system around him had to work harder to maintain the same level of control, and when that system weakened, the burden shifted back onto him. This is where the narrative begins to twist, because success created dependency, and dependency created vulnerability, and suddenly the question was no longer how to stop Messi, but what happens when the system that amplifies him begins to crack. Because for the first time, the game was not just reacting to Messi, it was learning from him and adapting in ways that made his environment less stable, less predictable, and more demanding than ever before. As the system around Messi began to fracture, the game entered a new phase, one where adaptation was no longer enough, it became confrontation. Because teams were no longer surprised by Messi, they were prepared for him. They studied his movements, they analysed his tendencies, they built entire defensive schemes designed not to stop him completely, but to limit his impact just enough to survive. And this is where the pressure intensified, not just physically, but mentally, because for the first time, the burden of control became constant. Every match demanded solutions, every touch carried expectation, every moment required precision, and the margin for error disappeared. And yet, even in this environment, Messi continued to produce moments that felt inevitable, not because the system supported him, but because he could operate even when the system failed. And this is what makes the build-up to the climax so different. It is not about one match or one goal. It is about a player carrying a structure that is no longer stable, adapting in real time, solving problems that should not be solvable, and pushing through a level of resistance that was designed specifically to neutralize him. And as the stage grows larger, as the stakes increase, as the pressure reaches its peak, the question becomes unavoidable. Not whether Messi can perform, but whether even he can sustain this level of control when everything around him is breaking, because this is where football stops being a system and becomes a test. Not of skill, but of something deeper. Something that defines whether Messi is still within the limits of the game, or finally beyond them. And then the moment arrives, not as a single event, but as a realization that has been building for years, because by now every defender knows what Messi is capable of. Every team has studied him. Every system has tried to contain him. And yet, when the ball reaches his feet, something shifts again. Time compresses. Space disappears. And logic begins to fail, not dramatically, not loudly, but quietly, almost invisibly, because Messi does not explode past players, he dissolves them. One touch to draw the defender, one movement to shift the angle, one decision made before anyone else has even processed the situation, and suddenly the structure collapses, not because it was broken, but because it was bypassed. And this is where the game reveals its limitation, because football is built on reaction, on cause and effect, on actions leading to responses, but Messi removes the reaction entirely. He acts before the system can respond, and in that space, that fraction of time where no one else exists, he becomes untouchable. And this is why the climax does not feel like dominance in the traditional sense. It feels like inevitability, because defenders are not losing to him physically. They are losing to something they cannot access, something they cannot process fast enough, something that operates just beyond their reach. And as the moment unfolds, as the ball moves exactly where it needs to be, as the defenders arrive just too late, as the goal becomes unavoidable, the realization is complete. Messi is not winning inside the game, he is existing outside of it, and that is what makes him something worse than the best, because the best can be studied, can be challenged, can be matched. But something that exists beyond the logic of the system cannot be solved, only experienced. And then after moments like this, the reaction is always the same. Analysts search for explanations, commentators reduce it to genius, fans call it magic, and the cycle repeats because football needs a way to understand what it just witnessed. But every explanation feels incomplete, every breakdown feels too simple. Because describing Messi as skillful or intelligent does not capture the full reality, it only translates the visible into familiar language. And that is where the misunderstanding continues because the game moves on. New players emerge, new systems develop, and yet the imprint of Messi remains, not just in highlights or statistics, but in how teams think about space, how coaches design structure, how players interpret decision-making, and this is the quiet impact, the one that is harder to see but impossible to ignore. Because once a system has been broken, it cannot return to its original form. It evolves, it adapts, it carries the memory of that disruption forward, and Messi becomes part of that memory, not just as a player who dominated his era, but as a reference point for what the game had to change in order to survive. And this is why the aftermath is not just about celebration or recognition, it is about adjustment. Because football did not simply witness Messi, it was forced to respond to him. What Messi leaves behind is not just a collection of trophies, goals, or individual awards. It is something far more difficult to define because legacy in football is usually measured by success. But Messi's legacy is measured by transformation, by the way the game had to change to understand him, by the way players who came after him began to think differently, move differently, interpret space differently, because before Messi, control in football was often associated with physical dominance or structured systems. But after Messi, control could exist in something smaller, quieter, more precise, something that did not rely on power, but on perception. And this shift matters because it expands what is possible inside the game. It allows players who do not fit the traditional model to exist, to succeed, to redefine expectations, and at the same time it forces coaches and analysts to reconsider the limits of structure, because if one player can disrupt an entire system, then the system itself is not as complete as it once seemed. And this is where Messi's legacy becomes more than influence. It becomes a question about how much of football is truly understood and how much of it is still reactive, still evolving, still vulnerable to the next anomaly, because Messi was not the first great player, and he will not be the last, but he represents something rare, a moment where the game itself is forced to confront its own limitations, and in doing so becomes something different, something more complex, something less certain, and that uncertainty is what Messi leaves behind, not just greatness but possibility. So in the end, Messi is not a conclusion, he is a question, a reminder that even in a sport defined by structure and repetition, there are moments where logic is not enough, where patterns break, where certainty disappears and something unexpected takes control. Because football, like any system, is built on the belief that everything can be understood, measured, predicted. But Messi challenges that belief not by rejecting the game, but by moving through it in a way that exposes its limits. And maybe that is what makes him so difficult to define. Not that he was better than everyone else, but that he revealed something incomplete in the system itself. Something that cannot be fully explained, only observed. And long after the goals, the trophies and the records are remembered, that question will remain not about how good Messi was, but about how much of the game we still do not understand.